we go. And you are live.
Thank you, just I took them out. Rich Westman, the Chair of Transportation. We are hearing updates from the agency. It is Tuesday, February 4th. If you could give us your name, your title.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Candace Alquist, for the record, Chief Financial Officer. I was asked to come in and talk about the FY26 budget. And at the same time, I had comments from the House wanting to know about how it is that we're using the 20.25 million appropriation that historically goes to public safety, to coin the JTOC appropriation for current services. So I created this presentation to talk a bit about how we approached creating the 26 budget and why we ended up where we did with the use of the JTOC appropriation. So this is more educational for you all, but just interrupt me whenever you have questions. It's a little weedy because I have snapshots of the Transportation Fund operating statement. So wherever you'd like to go with this, but it's a short slide deck. All right. So again, my first weedy slide here, what you're looking at is a snapshot of the Transportation Fund operating statement for how we ended fiscal 24 on June 30, 2024, and then how we balanced 25 when we left the last legislative session. And you could see that we balanced in 25 with $1 in that second column here.
So
Yes, Senator.
I was looking for, thank you,
Yeah.
Senator White, for
Oh, okay.
go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is what we do each session. We either try to balance with $0 or $1 or so starting 26, we looked at where we left last session, and I just wanted to highlight for you all 3 issues with these columns, which are really one-time revenue sources. The first up at the top, $8.5 million. That is going to be expected refunds from FHWA for administrative costs related to the July 23 flood. So that is a one-time refund that we actually still are expecting in FY25, have not yet received. The second issue in the first column there, $12.5 million. Those are reversions that.
And can you just remind me the refunds for administrative expenses? So we did the work to get ready to assess projects that from the flood.
These would be administrative expenses for projects that were FHWA eligible related to the July 23 flood.
Okay.
Yes.
May I?
Go ahead.
Follow up. So is the federal government, have they acknowledged that this is due to Vermont? I mean, not recently, but originally.
You mean where are we in the process of getting those refunds?
Yeah.
If we talk about it a bit on the next slide too.
Okay.
But negotiations continue. I am hopeful that we are going to receive that refund in this fiscal year.
So it isn't just a timing issue. It's not delayed. It's still in conversation.
It's in conversation. Yeah.
Okay.
And so what we have to do, prove that we did the work.
It's substantial documentation, Senator. Yes. So the second issue, this $12.5 million, those were reversions that the agency was forced to find at the end of fiscal 24, again, in order to come into balance. So we look agency-wide at the appropriations that could carry forward into the next year. And of those appropriations, we had to take 12.5 million of cuts. Ideally, each year we would not be finding a reversion figure because we will have passed the budget based on our needs. So the fact that we're relying on finding reversion each year.
We don't build budgets based on your needs. And I don't think we have ever done that. We base budgets on, on revenues. And then when you have the revenue, setting forecast that happens in July and January, then we build a budget based upon those. Sometimes, we all make estimates and we say we really need to do this, and we might find a new revenue source, or we might move money over from someone. But we build our budgets. We're always driven here by the revenue forecasts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm familiar with reversions in the capital bill, but I don't understand what you mean by reversions here.
In the transportation fund.
Yes.
In order to get to that $1 figure for fiscal year 24 closeout, financial operations tells us this was the amount that you said that you would take based on the budget that passed for 25, which if there had been a budget adjustment in 24, that would have impacted this statement. And they say in order to have the amount that you said you were going to have in the stabilization reserve, you need to find $12.5 million of reversions before.
Are reversions reductions?
They are reductions to what would have otherwise carried forward from 24 to 25.
Okay, so they were like not carryovers.
Correct.
They reverted to the trend.
That is correct.
But you didn't do anything with, because I'm just familiar with the reversions in the capital fund where they're appropriated again. But this
This is not being appropriated again. It's just helping us come into balance again, like the chair said, based on available revenue.
so you cut something.
We did not spend something. in
Okay,
24.
so
Well-
do you tell us where you didn't spend it?
It's a little more difficult for them in a couple of areas, because one, we build a budget on the construction side based upon estimates for costs of projects. And if those numbers come in wildly, we have to go in and adjust projects to make that. The other thing you can never control, and where there's absolutely the most state dollars, is in maintenance. If we have we build budgets based upon normal winters. But if we have 5 ice storms in a row and we wildly run over the number, then somebody has to go back in and that, so.
Well,
And some of it becomes, if you go into a recession, you're gonna have people drive less and there's less gas tax and but some of it is just the nature of it. So this is a normal process in getting to zero.
can I ask a question a different way?
Sure.
So I understand about the complexity and reality and, but is there a list somewhere of where this came from?
Absolutely, Senator.
Okay,
The 12.5 million is detailed in the first couple pages of the white book.
okay, great.
The third number to just highlight on the spreadsheet for you all is $25 million. That's a flat 25 million contained within the transfers to and from other funds. That was $25 million that was transferred to the transportation fund from the cash fund for capital and investments fund. So it was a one-time transfer from last year's budget bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that was intended, the 25 million.
That
I mean, I
20
remember that was for a particular project.
That was in last year's budget bill to bolster the revenues of the transportation fund to support our budget.
Okay, and it was 25 million but you
It
have a
was a-
different number.
It was a flat 25 million because some other fund transfers are included in this figure. We give 316,000 to the debt service fund and we receive 140,000 from the motorboat regulatory fund. So that's why that number is not flat at 25 million.
Okay.
But that's just to tell you all how we started the 26 budgeting process with a $46 million.
There's a 600,000 underneath the top one, the new revenue. What is that?
That would be the BEV and PHEV incentive fee revenue that was that did start on January 1st. Yeah.
So the 12.5 that's set aside from the general fund,
Yes.
is that in the 25? Or is that,
The additional 12.5 million is separate than the 25 million and that's on another.
so really that 12.5 should be on top of the 46?
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
I just wanted to briefly talk about 25, I'm sorry, moving into 25. You all may or may not know, I actually started in this role in May of 2024. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to move forward. And coming right in May, we already knew that we had an issue for 25 because the administrative reimbursement from FHWA that I mentioned earlier is now significantly less than previously forecasted. Previously on the last slide, you saw it was 8.5 when we were finalizing negotiations with FHWA and coming into close for 24. This number, as we're in negotiations with FHWA right now, is now 6.25. So that is an impact of $2.3 million. Over here on the side, I have a little tally of how we're coming into balance for 25. We had a little bit of a revenue forecast upgrade of 2.1, but included within the 2.1 was the additional BEV and PHEV revenue that the senator just mentioned a moment ago. So really that nets to 1.5. The 1.5 against the $2.3 million hit because we're getting less. Hopefully we're getting less from FHWA soon. And then I also have some tallies for additional carry forward appropriations we were able to find in order to fund the Section 6 of last year's T-bill. Section 6 said that the $3.3 million worth of cuts that were taken last year could be backfilled by the Secretary of Transportation if we were able to find the appropriate carry forward appropriations for that. So all of that nice tally on the side says for 25 starting out, we're in a $1.1 million hole. And the solution that the agency came up with that you'll see on the transportation operating statement, if Logan goes over it with you, is that the agency is committed to finding reversions this July. Again, like the chair mentioned, a normal part of our process, but one that we don't like to rely on because what we're basically saying is we need to find it somewhere else in our current year budget. So already in 25, we're committed to finding that 1.1. Any questions on 25? Yes, Senator.
The contingent appropriations expertise, that 3.3, could you
Yeah.
explain that again? Yeah.
That was the adjustments that both the House and Senate took to the GovRec for last year. It was a total of $3.26 million, and it was taken from maintenance and another appropriation. My apologies. I can get you the details on that if you like, but there was language in the T-bill that said we recognize that these funds were otherwise used, and if the Secretary of Transportation can find 3.26 million within carry forward funds, then those appropriations can be made. And financial operations interpreted that as contingent appropriations. And the Secretary.
Was this like a central garage line?
Yes,
Is that what-
yes, that is ringing a bell. Maintenance and central garage, you are correct.
Yeah, okay. Then I had another question on that. Why do you highlight the stabilization reserve on
Oh,
this page?
well, every time that we have new appropriations, it does have an impact to the stabilization reserve. So the fact that those were considered contingent appropriations, we had to increase the stabilization reserve by $40,000.
No, I see the difference. I didn't see that there was different, but
Yes.
it's $40,000 up. I see. Okay.
All right, so
Because
that's,
that's a percentage.
Makes sense.
so remember the $46 million issue from earlier going into 26. Now, talking about 26,
I would just say, with the 1.1, that it doesn't bother me, you know, this is just. We got, what, $335 million worth of revenue.
absolutely,
And you're off by 1.1.
call it a win.
May I just, so do you, commingle, capital and operating in the T fund?
We do have regular projects that are transportation.
But it looks like you,
But it's not, excuse me, Chairman Reed, Chief Engineer, but it's not commingled. We have specific appropriation lines for you know,
okay,
interstate bridge versus central garage versus maintenance.
but the revenue just comes in and then it gets split up into operating and capital?
Yeah, and Candace can talk about, to the
And I-
senator's earlier point, we start with a revenue projection, then we allocate funds to each of those lines.
Okay, so I'll just talk to you offline, please, if you don't mind.
There's nothing in our base budget, Senator, that is funded via the capital bill.
Well, I'm not talking about capital bill, I'm talking capital projects, like,
Oh.
like that 25 million that came from the capital bill was for a capital project. That was the logic in making that transfer.
Absolutely. We can,
So that's.
Yeah, so.
But I can talk to you offline.
Yeah, I guess to directly answer your question, yes, there is significant capital projects funded from the T fund.
Okay, because they have to be.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Not to bring up, but there is some discussion about a garages, you know, if it's.
oh,
And where that landed in the line of it, so. Go ahead.
oh, thank you, Senator. So again, we have that $46 million one-time revenue hole to address, but we also have known pressures when starting the FY26 budgeting process, and those are salaries for our state employee workforce, which is set out by the collective bargaining agreement between the state and the union. Salaries increased by 6.4% this past year. We also had benefits increases, which were given to us by finance and management. We had retirements. The retirement percentage increased by 7%, and the health benefits increased by an average of 16% on average. We also have internal service fund charges, which are given to us again by finance and management, and the service level agreement, which is given to us by ADS. Overall, 4% increase between those two items. And then we also have our own central garage internal service fund billings. We pay ourselves. We pay central garage for our fleet. So when you take even those four, basic needs into consideration, we're talking about $15.5 million on top of our revenue. Here we have a snapshot of what we ultimately submitted for a 26 budget. So our position against last year's appropriations is $4 million T fund, which is less than a 1.5 increase in T fund over last year, taking into consideration everything I just said. And the reason that we're able to present a budget with such a low percentage increase is because we have reduction proposals here equaling $14 million. And I am going to go to the next slide because I think this is a good summary of why I thought I would be here, which is how the Agency of Transportation found $61.5 million for FY26. We have
So, I would at some point, quickly from a high level, we want to run through the reduction.
absolutely.
I can understand from a high level why you at this point, but we're gonna move to.
Absolutely. Sure. All right, so we see those $14 million worth of budget reductions. That's an annual base budget reduction. We also are using ongoing revenue sources. We have the January 25 consensus revenue forecast, which gave us $10.3 million over 25 as past number. You can see now why the Agency of Transportation put forward to the governor's office and the Agency of Administration that we wanted to use the JTAC appropriation, the appropriation that historically goes to the state police for 20.25 million. And we propose that as an ongoing revenue source. We are also using a one-time revenue source, which is the $12.5 million that the chair mentioned earlier. That is also dependent on language that we put forth in the GovRec, sections D101 and D103. That is an amount in the cash fund for capital and essential investments fund that was previously reserved last session. And basically the language in the GovRec language document says we'd like to unreserve that money and use it this year to solve our problem. And then we have another one-time budget reduction here of $4.5 million worth of reversions rather than $12.5 million worth of reversions. This 4.5 combined with the 1.1 that we already committed to in FY25, $5.5 million. That's a much more sustainable number for the agency to find annually than the 12.5 that we were finding back in July 24.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So to be clear, there's no additional revenue source outside of these that the administration is proposing in the upcoming budget. That's correct. You will expect to live with a $5 million reduction moving forward into perpetuity.
Yes.
Okay. That's okay. Interesting.
So,
It's much more reasonable.
It is much more reasonable than the larger number. Yes, it's still a little concerning.
so we've got 5.5 million in reductions. We're counting on the 12.5, which is one-time funds. So we basically get $18 million
To start
that
with.
past this budget year will be gone. And the way that we make it, and we're doing the $5.5 million in reductions. At the same time, we're getting the 20.25 expense taken out of our expense line.
Yeah, you're talking about the fact that we're proposing to use the public.
So the JTAC is really an expense line. You know, it's a bill that we're paying to keep the state police going. And theoretically, back in the day when they settled on that after all the macerations of JTOC forever and ago, since 1991. Even with the 20.25, we've had to make the $5.5 million reduction.
Absolutely.
But after the 26 budget next year, when we're going into the 27 budget, if we do have the 20.25 back, the gap really is only 2.25 between the reductions and then the loss of the 12.5.
The gap for starting 27, I see it as the one-time revenue source that we're using from the cash fund, the 12.5 plus the annual reversion.
Well, that's in the 26.
Yes,
But when 27 comes, those are gone.
absolutely.
We've used them, they're one-time pieces.
Yes.
And we're back in the place where we're within 2.25 million of, because the difference between the 18, the 5.5, and the 12.5, because the 12.5 will be gone. Unless we're gonna live with the $5.5 million reduction forevermore. In that piece, if we were gonna try to backfill that, that's about 18 million. So, and we're getting back a flat 20.25.
I follow you, Senator.
Right, but the 18.5 is considering the 20.25 already.
Oh, I get that.
So it's not a net, it's a cumulative.
I get
Right.
that, but you were right. And so there's, it's a flat source that if, we do anything, that has step increases to pay or healthcare another year or none of, this does nothing for any of that really.
The 20.25 is going towards our base needs.
I have to say that, as we have all of the discussions between the general fund, the transportation fund, and the education fund, and the machinations that we're going through to have discussions around all of that, I would have felt a lot more comfortable if what the administration had come in with is some ability to address the purchase and use tax that goes to the ed fund, which is in my mind a revenue source that grows over time, and would address the flat revenues. This does nothing but give us some Band-Aid capacity in a 1-year period to address the immediately concern, but doesn't do anything for us for the future.
We are grateful for the administration of them proposing to have us use the JTOC appropriation rather than, potentially having to find even more cuts to our budget.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering for time, since we've got about 15 minutes left. This is a really robust conversation, and I know we have 2 individuals here who we're expecting to speak to us around 11:15. I'm wondering, and I know Jeremy has a presentation for us as well. I'm just wondering, timing wise, I can stay till 12:30 if we need to go into lunch, but
We may have to have you back. and that piece.
We only have 2 more slides here.
We're gonna run through your slides and we're gonna get to, I totally appreciate and I appreciate you coming. I will say for myself this is the most important issue that, we in transportation are going to have to talk about in the overall, going forward, this year. Did you,
Well, just process question. Is this part of BAA or is it something that we can, look, is there, when do we have to make decisions on this? On the teams? Or has it already happened?
well, the first shot out of the box
Okay,
has already happened.
And we can
Okay.
speak to that in the next couple slides a little bit.
okay,
But it's something I think we're all gonna have to have in the back of our mind
Yeah.
as we go forward in this. Because we can't maintain the agency without any of that. Megan, can you work with them to,
I'm already having special paragraph.
okay,
Apologies for going over, but we are almost to the end here.
no, I get it, and I know you're the messenger, so.
Really, this slide is just for your use when your committee is thinking about the JTAC appropriation. We put this together. This is a history of what we were able to come up with on how the JTAC appropriation came to be and how it currently stands in statute. But of course, work with your ledge council as you're considering, the use and potential discontinuation of the JTAC appropriation.
This only goes back to
2002.
2002.
is it okay to ask questions at the,
Yeah, it
Right.
certainly is. We really started JTAC in 1991.
Okay.
so
Thank you, Senator.
is the plan, the proposed budget, would it not support the police? Is that,
The services that the police are currently providing to patrol the highways would continue. Nothing would change in services. It's just that they'd be funded via general funds, base general funds. That is the governor's recommended. proposal.
somewhere else, in a different budget, not in your budget?
Via general funds.
Okay, so that
It's not
fund is
for-
gonna have some issues.
Yeah.
So we're just putting it onto a different fund, kind of like we subsidized you with the capital fund last
Well,
year.
and I think
Not you, but the fund.
this is not the first time the administration has made this recommendation.
Okay. I guess I would like to at some point have a conversation about what should it be, where should the police be, the highway patrol, this is highway patrol, right?
State police.
But state police who are the only ones on the highway. Or,
No.
I mean, there's the DMV people, but
Well,
the ones I
and
see are-
sheriffs and, I mean, on the interstates, it could be sheriffs, it could be
all right, well,
the locals.
the ones I see are the nice green cars at the, just waiting and do their job. I mean, they do a good
So
job.
if you look.
So
at-
where should those be funded, I guess? And we don't have to have that conversation now, but it would just be good to have a
I
philosophy behind what we're
I
doing.
think you really have to go back and it would be a discussion about the whole history of where all this landed and where it came from.
Okay,
In 1991, when we were in financial difficulty, we started a budget year, more than 500 million in the hole, and the whole general fund budget was about 700 million. And then there were three pieces to the deal that got us out of the going forward piece and the going back. State government cut 450 state employees. We put tiers on the income tax to handle the back debt. And then the debt going forward was less state employees, and they took a portion out of transportation, and that became the JTOP transfer. And over time, we periodically have narrowed the focus of what was taken for transportation. The last iteration of this whole process that you're going to see on this page narrowed the JTOG transfer to state police, with the thought that a piece of that was because state police does road patrols. This would totally back away from any of that now and would leave it a general fund function to fund the state police. My intention is that I think people in the legislature in the overall are going to have to think about, how do we see our education fund, our general fund, and our transportation fund bump up against each other? Because there is a number of ways that we bump up. One, we bump up on the revenue side. Purchase and use tax, many would argue, should go into the T fund. And it's 2/3, 1/3. Or you can get rid of the expense for the JTOG. I appreciate the fact that the administration recognizes the difficulty of the T fund, but what it does is give us back a flat revenue source, which our overall problem within transportation really is that other than purchase and use, our revenue sources are all flat or declining. And so this is from my point of view, a Band-Aid solution to a long-term solution that is not going away. And my hope was what they would be able to present to us is show us that this was a Band-Aid. And I would like, from my point of view, I think they did exactly what, but we need to talk about in the overall as the legislature, how our funds bump up against each other and what are the solutions to solve the long-term problems in transportation of not being able to meet our expenses. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate your focus on this topic. And well, I personally am in favor of the JTOG transfer happening. I think that this is I think it's a very reasonable suggestion to meet the demand. But I think your point about it not being a revenue source that increases while we continue to see the cost of things increase is really pertinent. So my question would be, did you consider any other revenue generating sources like indexing the gas tax or any of the things that were recommended in that funding study that came out?
That funding study was done by a consultant, CDM Smith. So it is extremely comprehensive. It's just that none of those additional revenue sources are contained within the FY26 GovRec. So they were not considered when we were figuring out how to balance for 26.
Okay, but maybe something to consider 27.
Go ahead.
Just interesting word choice. So not considered, does that mean not chosen? Or not even looked at? Or is that fair?
I don't think I'd be able to speak to
Okay.
that.
I think that's way above their heads.
Okay, got it. Okay.
But well worded to be.
My last slide here is the whole reason why Jeremy has been sitting next to me. We have heard questions over in the House of potentially, the 20.25 million not being available to be funded by the general funds, although conversations continue over there. So we just wanted to create some kind of scenario from the Agency of Transportation of what we would do if we had to find $20.25 million worth of cuts without the use of the JTOC appropriation.
So what we would offer is this is only 12.5 million of that 20.25, but it certainly does represent a fairly significant swing at getting there. This is principally targeting paving projects because, as some of you may have heard last week, the TIF fund is largely restricted to the type of projects that it can be used on. So paving is largely funded by the transportation fund, and our bridge programs are largely funded by the TIF fund. So to come up with a scale of reductions that we'd be talking about, if the JTOC fund were kept in place, or the JTOC transfer were kept in place, we would be effectively cutting roughly $44 million, or not cutting, but postponing $44 million worth of projects, largely in the paving program. The issue, to Senator Harrison's point, is just the nature of construction. We've got to get those projects on the street. So aside from the DLEV, which is state funded district leveling that we fund, which basically pays the worst of the worst in the spring, where a capital project isn't quite ready. So think Montpelier to Waterbury northbound. That was a DLEV project last year. So aside from that, the Killington Stockbridge project at the bottom and the Pittsford Brandon roadway project, all of those other projects we hope to have under contract by mid-March, let's say. So if this body were to not support the retention of the JTOC appropriation, we would be in a very difficult place wherein we would have to negotiate delays with contractors for those projects. If we were to not move those projects forward, it would severely hamper our ability to do that work this spring or this summer. And the net effect would be roughly $102 million paving program dropping to $68 or $69 million, which would be in round terms 50% of where it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Go ahead. Pat.
And that's already in a program that's down a bit over the last couple of years.
Correct. So from memory, I think we went from 140 to 130 to 102 this year. And so, you know, the $41 million on this sheet within the paving program would be yet another reduction in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this shows 26 and shows exactly where we are. Given normal inflation, given normal increases in costs to pay our employees, to do healthcare, to do that, is there a way that you can and you understand your normal inflation? What would this look like going out to 27 and 28?
So if I understand your question, what would be the cost implications to postponing this work 2 or 3 years?
What would be, no. Yeah, you would have to include that in, but more importantly, if I get the JTOC transfer back,
Yes.
what's the hole in 27? What's the hole in 28?
I could take this,
Yeah.
Jeremy. If AOT were able to use the JTOC appropriation, then we're already starting 27 with a known hole of $17.5 million
Can I
because
get that on a chart that would highlight that? So even with the JTOC transfer, next year, if we're all back here sitting at this table, we already start the year with a $17 million hole with the $20 million coming back.
yes. And that 17.5 is made up of the 12.5
Yeah.
million one time that we're
And
using.
because
And
the
the 5
20
million version.
from the JTOC transfer is a flat 20 million. We'll continue to have the inflation. we could get something that is the line to say, here's what it looks like in 27, here's what it would look like in 28, given normal average increases in costs. Not anything extraordinary, just
We can get that to you.
do you have a big check for us? Please.
$15 and 40 minutes.
This was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have one
Just
more?
one more question. I'm just looking in the book, which we haven't gone through yet, but it looks like 100+ paving projects are in the, how do you choose these?
So when we looked at what were viable projects for the 20.25 million reductions, again, we took all the emergency relief projects off the table. We took anything TID funded off the table. We took anything that was currently under contract off the table. And so that basically narrows it down to paving projects with construction expenditures in FY26 that are not under contract. And virtually that's the entire list.
And what's the drop dead date that you need to know, Jeremy?
Well, there is no drop dead date, but
Contract rolling.
yeah, so the very first project on the list there was the Berrytown Orange contract. So we have an executed contract at this point. The remaining contracts going to Essex and Fairfax, we hope to have those contracts executed by, I'll just say mid to the end of March. Killington Stockbridge, we have some time on. Pittsburgh Grandin, we have some time on, and DLEP, we have some time on. But ultimately, we will be committed for, whatever that sum is, basically 10 million by end of March. At that point, we would be in negotiations with those contractors to basically pay for delay damages or to pay to cancel those contracts without receiving any meaningful work.
I would just say that it would be my hope that when the larger discussions happen within, we can't control anybody else, but within the Senate, when the larger discussions can come about the relationship between the three major funds, transportation, education, and the general fund, that I would hope that the leadership in the Senate would include transportation in those discussions, because going forward, we can't maintain this.
Right.
You know, if we think transportation is an important function, we have to be included in those discussions. And I think those get at the core of the heart of any discussion that we're going to have about financing going forward for the good of the place. Thank you.
You all. I'm going to stop here.
If you can get us some projections going forward, the 17 million is a helpful number to have. I know that's just going to blow out the water years out there because of.
I mean, the numbers probably are abstract, but I think the funding and finance report shows the trends.
Yep, I get it.